Mythicist Milwaukee Show. I'm your host, Rob Moore. Here with me, as always, Brian Edward. What's going on today, Brian?
I'm feeling good. Feeling good. Happy to hear.
We are podcasting, as always, from the Bucket Works location in the Grand Avenue Mall in beautiful downtown Milwaukee. A little foggy, a little drizzly today, a little cold again. We had one nice day of weather, and now we're back to the crud. But we are here.
It is better than a sharp stick in the eye.
Keeping an eye on the secular movement, and tonight's guest is a repeat. An old friend of the program. He's Patrick Harrigan. He's a comparative religious scholar, author, photographer, publisher, and a well-known supporter of the Yazidi cause. Welcome back, Patrick. What's going on?
Good day. This is Patrick, and I'm calling you from sunny Gainesville, Florida.
Well, we're jealous.
Yes, sir.
I wish I was in Florida. So what's the word on the Yazidi? You've got an interesting, I was looking at the piece, you've got some takes on the mythological origins, not necessarily talking about activism today, but talking about the some revelations about the mythic origins of the Yazidi religion as it relates to the well-known to us anyway, the Peacock Angel, which we've talked about at length with a few different guests. Go ahead and tell us what's going on with your research.
Of course, the Yazidi people of Iraq have been in the news, especially last year when they were under assault by the Islamic State. They have they're still in the news, and that is where people get their news about the Yazidi people. So the coverage about their heritage, their background, their beliefs tends to be rather superficial. And indeed, it's hard for outsiders, but Yazidis, to find out authentic information about their religion. What we know from the Yazidis is that their religion is very ancient indeed. In fact, by the Yazidi calendar, we are now in the year 6,765, which makes them, by their own reckoning, older than the Hebrew calendar.
That puts...
My own background is not as a scholar of Middle Eastern religions. I'm an Indologist by training, that is, a student of the Indian languages and religion of the Indian subcontinent. And I have been studying the cult of Skanda or Murugan, the Indian god of war, mystery, and romance since the early 1970s, and have spent perhaps 20, 25 years in the Indian subcontinent studying this god of war, of romance, of wisdom, and publishing about him, organizing conferences, and publishing. And this, unbeknownst to me, has brought me and my work to the attention of Yazidis around the world, especially, of course, the few of them who speak English. And there are a few. Most Yazidis, there are less than 1 million in the world, and most of them are in Mesopotamia, that is northern Iraq. Because of the violence there, several thousand of them have been driven to take asylum in Europe, especially in Germany. There are just a few thousand of them in the Western Hemisphere, especially in Nebraska. It transpires that among them there is a Yazidi activist by name Nalain Aljiwa Sawilo, who comes from a long line of Magi or Magi, that is, from generation to generation for literally thousands of years. This family, like have passed down knowledge about astrology, about numerology, about mythology, which makes it therefore genuine. However, it is not passed outside of the Yazidis. They do not marry outside of Yazidis. They do not admit, let alone encourage outsiders to convert to the Yazidi faith. Therefore, our outside information about the Yazidi faith tends to be not only sparse, but often based on hearsay and rumor. Yazidis, according to the Yazidis, the creator God, his task is to create the world. And at that, his task of creation is finished. So part of his creation is he creates angels, 7 angels, the Heft Seer, literally the 7 mysteries, whose responsibility it is to administer God's creation. And this has got them tagged as worshippers of angels, but in the eyes of many Muslims, especially fundamentalists, the Yazidis are tagged as devil worshippers, as worshippers of the devil, because one of their names of the principal angel is Shaitan, which to Muslims means none other than the devil. But it is, however, a confusion, and which is not surprising considering how little we know, how little the Yazidis tell the outside world about their religion. So my call it research has been facilitated by this a Magi woman who is studying at the Zoroastrian College in Los Angeles, who is based with the Lalish Religious College in Iraq, Nalain Aljiwa Saliwo. And we have been collaborating. We've begun to publish articles about authentic Yazidi religion, and we intend to continue to clarify the misunderstandings that the outside world has. Of course, we know that the Yazidi people are now and have been going through a terrible crisis at the hands of the Islamic State. And this is nothing new, however. According to the Yazidis, they have been subject to at least 72 catastrophes at the hands of outsiders. Some say that last year was the 73rd and the 74th. However, these figures, these numbers, when we're speaking of ancient faiths, like the Yazidi faith, have to be taken as symbolic figures. The number 72, for example, to the Yazidis, God created 72 nations or tribes, and the Yazidis believe they have been persecuted by all 72, and therefore they give a figure of 72 persecutions in their history. However, this is not really a counting of disasters. It is rather a symbolic number, and we'll go into this further.
Good, because I think when you hear that number 72, the first thing I thought of was 72 virgins or 72 white raisins, depending on the translation you pick in Islam. And I'm curious why 72 is picked, but it sounds like we're going to get into that.
Yes, I couldn't tell you why it's 72, but you've exactly pointed out that there are symbolic figures which are symbolic across the religious spectrum, not just in Semitic religions, not just in Indian religions, but has a kind of basis in symbology itself.
Right.
Oh, it's seven days of the week, and the six rays in the return to the center that you speak about. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yes. The Yazidi religion is, they worship 7 angels, of whom the principal one, called Taus Malik, literally the peacock angel, is the principal one. And he is considered by Yazidis to be God's regent, God's representative on earth. And that the affairs of men, the affairs of the world are entirely in the hands of the peacock angel, who is the seventh angel. Now, how do the Yazidis come to the figure 7? Because 7 is very important for them. They speak of the 7 colors of the rainbow, of the 7 angels, the 7 days of the week. Well, it turns out the number 6 and the number 7 have intrinsic connection with the process of creation. By creation, I mean manifestation in 3-dimensional space. So the transition from pure thought, which is without outside of space and time, into our world that we are familiar with of space and time in 3-dimensional space, consists of well, the Yazidis tell it very, very, very plainly. In the beginning, God wished for there to be the world, but there was nothing. There was a dimensionless point, and that point, represented as an egg, exploded. Now it exploded when it exploded into 3-dimensional space, and 3-dimensional space, of course, of the 6 directions: above, below, left, right, in front, and behind. Is a 3-dimensional grid, and that explosion also is analogous to when we speak of the Big Bang theory in cosmology, where the universe began as a singularity, as a dimensionless point, which suddenly exploded, as it were, and gave rise to not only space, 3-dimensional space, but also to time, because there was no time. Before there was space, there was no time either. So the dimensionless point, the center, explodes into 3-dimensional space, represented as six rays in 6 directions. Then that is creation in 6 directions. When the 7th is represented by the center, and when the 6 turn back and return to the center, that center is the point of beginning, the point of completion, fulfillment, and rest. And that is why the Bible, the Old Testament, speaks of creation in 6 days, where 6 days are not to be taken literally, but again, like the 6 directions of space. And then the fulfillment, the completion, is to return to the sacred center, and that is the place of rest. And therefore, it corresponds to the Sabbath, to the day of rest, the holy day. And for Yazidis, it represents the 7th angel, who is the holiest, the complete angel, and that is Taus Malik, the peacock angel. We see this also in Hinduism and in other religions. I learned this not from speculation, but by years of association with the cult of Skanda or Murugan, the war god. Skanda is the Sanskritic name of the war god Skanda or Kartikeya, who's associated with the Pleiades. The Kritika, therefore, is called Kartikeya, born of the Pleiades, and who is also has become identified with the South Indian Dravidian war god Murugan or Seyon. Seyon meaning the ruddy red one, because he's associated with this color of the rising sun. And Murugan from Murgu, which means a tender blade of grass. So their god Murugan, the war god, is ironically called the tender one. So the the Indian war god Skanda or Murugan is represented as a tender child, which is quite in contrast to Roman or Greek mythology, where the war god Ares is a bulking, powerful, but a little weak-headed. In the Indian war god is a god of wisdom and cunning. And he, too, is associated with the same symbolism of the number 6. The god Skanda, or Murugan, is said to have been born from a spark from his father, Shiva. And Shiva is considered as one of the great triad of gods. Shiva is the destroyer, the transformer. So when the divinities were facing a dire plight at the hand of the Titans, the demons, demonic horde, and the demons had enslaved the devas, that is, literally the shining ones, the archangels in Hinduism. The devas or the archangels went to the great god Shiva on Mount Kailasa and prayed to him, "Please give birth to a son. Only your son can relieve us of this catastrophe." So Shiva, who himself is quiescent, who does not engage in activity. Notice the parallel to the Yazidi god, who is not involved in activities. The Hindu god Shiva then, from his third eye, emits 6 rays or sparks. This again is the very same genesis that we were speaking of, where from a single point, a dimensionless point, spring 6 rays in 6 different directions. And in the Hindu mythology of the god Skanda, the 6 rays land in a marsh in the Himalayas. Again, this birth motif of landing in a marsh. For instance, Moses was found in a marsh among reeds, and the god Skanda too. The 6 rays, it said, land in a lake of reeds, a marsh, and there the 6 manifest as 6 baby boys, and who are then found by 6 the Kritika maidens, Kritika from the Pleiades. These maidens, or they're actually apsaras, they're water spirits, nymphs, as it were, find these 6 baby boys, which arose from the 6 sparks coming from Shiva's third eye, and each one takes for its out of the 6 infant boys and suckles it as wet nurse. But then Lord Shiva's Parvati comes, and she claims for herself all 6 and gathers the 6 into her arm and embraces the 6, and the 6 become one child having 6 faces, and hence the origin of the 6-faced god Skanda. The 6 faces again represent none other than the 6 directions of space: up, down, forward, behind, left, and right. And this association with birth, with creation and Genesis, as you see, is intimately tied up with the nature of 3-dimensional space itself.
I really enjoy the symmetry there. There's a real poetic symmetry between what you're saying and the actual Big Bang itself, and it appears that could be a touchstone for science-minded people and religious-minded people to kind of have some common ground there. My problem is, and we've heard this from other scholars, that this idea that what it does in my mind is lend credibility to the idea that the ancient people had some native understanding of the Big Bang. Do you see it that way, or is this merely a coincidence that we can kind of use poetically to tie the two together?
It is remarkable that we seem to have come full circle we're looking at the most ancient accounts of people from early Mesopotamia. Could be the Yazidis claim that theirs is the oldest religion on earth, and they have a plausible claim to that. And their account of Genesis is remarkably similar to our physicists' theoretical models of how the universe came into being in the Big Bang, that it began as a singularity, that is, a dimensionless point from which space was created. And it seems to be the very same story. And as I've pointed out, the same story underlies the mythology, the core beliefs, not only of the Yazidis, but also of Hindu civilization, and even of others as well. For example, the Hebrew Bible speaks of the creation in 6 days, and on the seventh day, God rested. That is the same principle, where the seventh, the return to the sacred center, is a return to rest and perfection.
What do you know? Is some of this revisionist, where this is added later, or how far back does the 7-day week go? Is one of my questions, and also, how far back does the kind of the 6 day? Do we create the week from the dimensions? You know, the ancients would have known 6 dimensions. Is that where we get it, and how far back does it go?
Well, in other parts of the world, for instance, in India, they speak of 7 days. But we believe that the notion of time, of the day, of time being divided into 7 days of a week, does not begin in India, nor did it begin in Israel with the Old Testament. It seems to have begun in Mesopotamia. And the Magi, the Mesopotamian seers, the keepers of knowledge, were also principally, they were the creators of astrology or astronomy, which were one and the same science until the Middle Ages. So I would venture a guess that the division of time into 7 days began in Mesopotamia long ago. That would put it perhaps coincident with the Yazidi calendar, 6,765 years ago.
Don't we need to work the lunar 28-day lunar cycle in to make that 7 times 4? Doesn't that work into the 7 days somewhere, or am I off base?
I think the question
was.
Repeat that. The question was, the ancients probably would have known the cycles of the moon to be 28 days. Did they divide that by 4 and come up with the 7-day week there? Is that at all related?
That would be one way of looking at it. But what I am suggesting is that the process of creation, of manifestation from pure dimensionless thought into three-dimensional space structurally involves six directions. And return to the sacred center is as the seventh, which is the most powerful, the greatest of the 7 is the seventh, the center. I would suggest that is the source of the notion of the association between creation and the 7 days, where creation was in 7 days of activity, and the 7th day is a day of rest. And the month of being of 28 days, to the ancients, that may have been the month was a multiple of the week, 4 times 7, rather than the week being 1/4 of a month.
See, I tend to look at it like they noticed that the moon was 28 days. You divide that by 4, you get 7. Then the model of 6 directions exploding from one dimensionless point is 6, not 7, and the 7th day being a return to the center. That seems like a more of an enforced figure of the poetry to make 7 out of what really could be easily seen as 6 and leave it at that. But the 7 makes it fit other magic.
The ancients, in particular the Mesopotamians, the Magi, who were the from whom we have astronomy and astrology, they were very much aware that a month is not exactly 28 days. It's about 28 and a quarter days.
Sure.
Okay. So, yeah, they would have figured this out. So you think that the creation story itself comes from the understanding of 6 dimensions, and somehow the extra is the center where we came from. I mean, that seems plausible that's where it might come from, and you supported it. That's interesting.
I like the imagery a lot. Yeah. I really find it fascinating. I just wonder if, it's been shown we basically know that the Big Bang happened how many billions of years before there were any humans at all. And this seems to suggest that human beings have an innate understanding of that creation. You know what I mean? It just adds a little bit of a leap. It's a little bit of a leap to me to think that this was actually an active part of the myth.
But if you think about how like a chicken is born or something coming out of an egg, to think how did the Earth come or how did the universe come? And again, I don't think they imagine it like space like we do, but coming out of something.
I think we got lucky with the actual Big Bang Theory mirroring, mirroring religious thought. Yes. I'm not sure that's. I'm not sure it goes the other way. It's fascinating. I love this stuff.
Yeah.
And the proof that these ancient peoples were on the right track and that they used somehow the same, I won't call it reasoning, it's not necessarily rational. They would have said it was vision, it was contemplative, that they actually saw, or in the Indian mind, they literally heard. The Vedas, for example, are what are heard. That the same model of three-dimensional world arising from a bursting of a dimensionless point into 6 dimensions and returning to the sacred center. This is found not just in the Old Testament, where it's most familiar to us, but also in Hinduism, as I've pointed out, and also in Yazidi. And I wouldn't surprise us to see it elsewhere in the world among ancient faiths. It's an article of faith for these people because it's been handed down. But if we can speak of originators, of authors or creators of this vision, it is, I would understand it not being a story. It is rather, it almost has a basis in mathematics. Just as our contemporary physicists seem, from out of nothing, they seem to be able to create a theory of the Big Bang, and they can support it with mathematics. But what they've arrived at is a model which is remarkably similar to the most ancient information we have in this world.
Do you have any connection to, say, the Native Americans? This is getting back well into prehistory, where they are crossing sometime 30, even 40,000 years ago. Are you seeing any similarities there? I know it's pretty hard to get back farther than 5,000 BC or so, but do you see different similarities that may have come out of Central Asia?
I'm sorry, but I can't claim that knowledge. My work has been focused on the traditions of the Indian subcontinent, which by itself is a very rich field when you think of all the religions that have originated in India. But no, I can't tell you about American India.
That's fair.
Let me take you back to the war god, and you mentioned you've been researching Skandar and Murugan, and how is the war god manifest as a baby, as wisdom and a baby? How is that? How do we justify that with a loving creator God? How does one end up being a war god, which to me is destruction and death? And on the Yazidi side, it's the peacock that
to Hindus, well, we say Hindus. The term is not one that they invented. They are called Hindus by Muslims who crossed the Indus River and called them Hindus. Their faith to the Hindus is the Sanatana Dharma, the Dharma being the order of the universe, and Sanatana meaning eternal or timeless. And in that sense, it's a very apt term to describe other faiths as well, which base themselves upon metaphysical principles such as this, where creation in three dimensions has a almost mathematical basis and expresses itself in a mathematical way.
Right. What do we know of mathematics back then? I mean, how advanced is it? In 47, in 5000 BC or so.
We know for a fact that some of the greatest mathematical discoveries were not made by moderns. For instance, algebra was if not invented by the Arabs, it was passed on to us by its very name, algebra. In particular, the Romans, who did not have the Arabic numbers, were never able to get very far with mathematics because of their cumbersome counting system. If you're familiar with Roman numerals, it's hard to even read a number, let alone to do any calculations in Roman numerals.
Super Bowl's having a problem there too. Right?
Yes. And what we call Arabic numerals are not Arabic at all. The Arabs got them from India, and this is well known. And perhaps the greatest discovery of all by Indian mathematicians was the zero. No one ever thought of the zero. In our base 10 counting system, the zero is essential. Actually, it's a placeholder. It's a place where nothing is there. A zero.
And how old is that? How old is the Indian zero? Do you have an approximate date?
It goes back to the science of Indian grammar, of all things. It might surprise modern listeners. And the science of grammar or linguistics, our modern science of linguistics actually began when British administrators in the East India Company had the leisure to study from Brahmins Sanskrit language, and they discovered very early on that Sanskrit is remarkably similar to classical Greek and Roman, and through them to English, German, and modern European languages. And in going further into the study of Sanskrit language, they learned that the ancient Indians had attached great importance to analyzing language and to preserving correct pronunciation. The reason for this was because the mantras or spells that are recited during rituals at a Vedic fire sacrifice, for example, and including the names of gods, must be pronounced correctly, and it must be used precisely so, or else they are not effective.
And that they somehow numerize this in order to preserve the names? They change the names into numbers?
Yes. So a grammarian called Panini created a grammar, which is a kind of calculus, a very abbreviated symbolic representation of grammar that from which our science of linguistics was born, and it was at this time for the purpose of preserving the correct pronunciation of the Vedas, especially the mantras or spells recited during the fire sacrifice, that grammar was born, and from it was the concept of the zero. So mathematics in the Indian context actually arose from the study of grammar and linguistics, which arose from ritual science.
So that would have to be sometime after Alexander the Great. So beyond sometime forward of 330.
long before Alexander the Great. It would come actually to pinpoint the invention of the zero. That would be rather hard. But the Vedas date from at least 1000 to 1200 BC.
Okay, so then the suggestion is the Roman and Greek is based on Sanskrit, not the other way around.
Yes.
Okay.
See, the Romans and the Greeks, they didn't have this. It came to them through it came to us rather through the Arabs. So this was the Roman numeral system was in use into the Middle Ages. It was only through Arabs who had their armies overran not only to the west but also to the east, where in India they recognized a good thing and they borrowed the Indian numeral system, which came to us and we call the Arabic numerals.
That's an interesting.
And only because of the zero, which is the Arabic numerals, that our system of mathematics and with it algebra, calculus, and everything else has been able to advance. Imagine trying to do algebra or calculus in Roman numerals.
And without a zero. You got to have
without a zero, yes. Yeah.
It's 2:40. You're listening to the Mythicist Milwaukee Show, brought to you in part by Craft, the Kenosha Racine area of free thinkers. We're talking to Patrick Harrigan. Sounds like a punchline from an Irish joke. Patrick Harrigan, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is that a lot? He's got interesting research on the common mythic origins of the Yazidi creator god and certain Hindu war gods, and it occurs to me that what you're looking at in the micro is kind of what we hope to find in the macro, mythic origins of different religions that might lead to a common understanding. In your case, the Yazidi and the people who constantly persecute them in that part of the world. Do you have any hope that this could happen on a larger scale, where mythicists around the world find evidence of common mythological origins of the greater, and I mean larger religions in the world, leading to peace and understanding? You think that's possible?
Well, you flatter me when you call this my research. It's true. I have spent a lot of years to piece this together and to understand it, but also, in the words of one of my teachers, there's nothing new under the sun. What we're talking about is very, very ancient. The creation of three-dimensional space and time from a singularity. That singularity is, what is that but the zero? The zero that was conceptualized by Indian grammarians more than 2,000 years ago. Yes, it would be a great thing if this could be understood better. The very fact that our 21st century understanding of the genesis of the creation of the universe is remarkably similar to that of the Yazidis and, for that matter, the Hindus, should give us pause for reflection and for a dose of humility also. But we should also consider that if we could go even still deeper and understand what underlies religion. It's not all fairy tales. there's often a deep basis to the ancient understanding. And when something is modern, it's not necessarily superior or better. And this is the very objection of religious fundamentalists around the world when they look at the modern world, and they couldn't disagree more that the world is, to them, is not a better place. It's a worse place. This social dimension is the issue that has to be addressed and looked at, because we see around the world is increasing polarization, where on the one hand, the West, especially America in particular, is going headlong into not only technological change but also social change, which is eliciting in turn a reaction from people in other parts of the world, from conservative societies in the Middle East, in India, and elsewhere, where they find the changes, especially social changes, abhorrent. You only have to look at the internet to see what kind of changes that I would say the majority of people in the world, certainly in the developing world, object to vehemently. And this has been given rise to such, to us, abhorrent sects as the Islamic State, as Al-Qaeda. So here, this is not a mere theoretical consideration, a coffee table discussion. We're talking about a life and death issue, and not just for the people, for the Yazidi people, not just for the people of the Middle East. This is a global challenge today. How do we face up to these differences, to these to the tension between ancient and modern? How do we reconcile? Because if we can't, we're only going to face more and more of these abominations. For example, we've sent our Air Force and our Navy to strike at targets of the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. But if we could unleash the entire power of the Air Force and Navy, would it solve the problem? I dare say it would be only like pouring oil on a fire. It would make it worse. In other words, there are, and this is what our leadership is recognizing, there are limits to what you can do with physical power, with military power. And when we're looking at, for example, the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, we must be able to confront them on the plane of ideology. They have to be understood at an ideological level. And if they're not, then we are helpless, because they understand us better than we understand them.
But will they ever listen to reason? I mean, aren't there people that won't be swayed by any of this, and they're just going to do what they want to do?
Yes, they are following their ideological blueprint. And not only Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, it is an apocalyptic blueprint where they are consciously not only, and it's not just Islamic State, not just Al-Qaeda, who are the Sunnis, but it's also the Shia side, Iran, where Iran is now, could be probably developing a nuclear capability. And in Iran, it is the state policy to not only look forward to a apocalypse, but to actively encourage it.
That is true. I do think that there are many that are trapped within there. I feel it's the leadership, it's those that in power enforce the policy, come up with the dogma. And I don't think that we can wipe in all Iranians. Really, if that government was replaced, I think Iran could be a solid ally. But you're right; it's this dogma. It does have a certain pervasiveness, but there are definitely non-believers trapped there.
How do you confront a dogma? However, you can't just snuff it out. In this era of internet, ideas travel faster than lightning. You have to first understand the ideology. And this is where we, as moderns, as Americans and Europeans, have fallen woefully short. And we're going without a proper understanding of our adversaries.
True. But I think that's why we need to support certain Muslim reformers, Najib Jawaz, Irshad Manji, who are employing ijtihad, which is part of Islam, to change this, change hearts and minds, move the religion without canceling it. And I think those people don't get enough support. I think you're in line with them.
Exactly. The Prophet Muhammad himself spoke of the greater jihad and the lesser jihad. And by the lesser jihad, he referred to waging war. And by the greater jihad, he understood waging war upon one's own ego. And within each and every one of us, there is a despot, who rules over us. And we believe that we are that despot.
This is
and that is the ego. And that is the greater jihad, the greater struggle,
and what I
overcome that.
Right, and I meant ijtihad. It's not jihad, but ijtihad. It means interpretation. And that there is a classical scholarship within Islam that stopped around 1100 AD. And if we can revive that, and the gates of ijtihad have been closed, and the scholarship has really remained somewhat stagnant. If we can open those up, then it allows for a different understanding and a greater understanding of where we all came from, less dogma, more pluralism. And there are people working on this.
Yes, but that understanding has to come to the attention not only of our leadership, and by that I mean our political leadership and our military leadership. Recently, in the Atlantic magazine, a leading U.S. general was quoted as saying, "We haven't a clue what is. We don't understand the Islamic State at all."
That's true.
And that is true. But in a democratic society like ours, it's not enough if even the president himself were to have an understanding, because we govern by consensus. So our political leadership, our military leadership, and the population at large need to have a understanding of this adversary, which is not a particular Al-Qaeda this, and today it's Islamic State, and tomorrow it's something else. They all have something in common, and that is they are literalists. They believe in a book and they take it literally. And if you do not accept that book, you are damned, and you're in their gun sights if you don't accept their book, their particular understanding of that book.
Right, their understanding. And that you're right. I think understanding religions in general does help this problem. And the apathy itself is part of the issue. And trying to look at this very simply is the wrong way to do it. We're in a total agreement there.
It's hard for us because we live in a secular society. Our values are mostly secular. We speak of ourselves as being a one nation under God, as being church-going people, or going to wherever a people of faith. But actually, our values are primarily secular, and we're confronted by an adversary who rejects secular values, who rejects for example, the Islamic State rejects the notion of nations. So they're not interested, for example, in joining the United Nations.
Correct.
If we think of the Islamic State as having territory and being a country, no, they disagree. They are not a country. They're not a nation. They're not interested in joining nations.
Correct. They're at war with every nation that they border. They want to take over Kaaba and Mecca. So yes, they're at war with everyone.
Yes, and they will not stop until by their reckoning, until Judgment Day. Mm-hmm. And for them, Judgment Day couldn't come soon enough.
It's nice that you say that.
How do we? Yeah.
You talk about this being a secular society, and I guess the point is pretty well taken when you look at the overall. But don't you think there's a pretty vocal sector here in America that's trying to turn it the other way, that's trying to establish a theocracy, that's trying to deny that this is a secular nation?
Yes, it is, but it's primarily a reaction. It is one of they want to go back to an earlier, simpler time, and they believe that every answer is already found in the Bible. I don't believe that all the answers are found in the Bible.
Right. It's the nonviolent version of ISIS.
For now. For now, it's nonviolent. But that's what we worry about here.
It's the same principle. It is fundamentalism. It's reducing everything to absurdity sometimes.
Yeah, that's what I was getting.
So when confronted with mountains of evidence, for example, about climate change, their ideology drives them to deny, because they're driven by ideology.
That's right.
So we have to understand the ideology, why people, not only in our own society, but around the world, religious fundamentalism is not restricted to Muslims or Christians. We have Hindu fundamentalists. We have Buddhist fundamentalists. Look at Myanmar. Look at Sri Lanka. I can tell you, I know from living 20 years in Sri Lanka, that Buddhist fundamentalism is a growing problem there. It's a growing problem around the world.
No, it is.
What kind of mischief do Buddhist fundamentalists get up to?
Well, you may not be familiar, but Sri Lanka fought a 26-year, almost a civil war. There's 75% of the population are Buddhists, and perhaps 12% are Hindus. The Hindus felt that they were not receiving a fair shake because the British parliamentary democracy system bequeathed upon Sri Lanka when the British left in 1948 means that the 75% Buddhist majority could grant themselves whatever rights they want and take those rights from the minority. So, for example, they took away the right of voting from thousands of Hindus. They made it a prerogative. If you want a job, if you want to enter university, fine. Take your examination in Sinhalese language, not in Tamil language. And that is a manifestation of the same fundamentalism. And when it gets mixed together with politics, it's a very explosive combination, like in Sri Lanka, like in Iran. It could happen anywhere.
I was in Sri Lanka in 2006. We were pulled over at a random traffic stop just to see if we were potential terrorists.
Profiled.
That's all they. Yep.
You got profiled.
So, but yeah, we're very. It still exists to some extent today.
It's the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. We got a couple.
Yes, and
couple minutes left. Patrick, you want to plug a website, a book? What are you up to next? What's coming up for?
Yes, I would like to acknowledge that this it's not a discovery of the association between the Yazidi religion's peacock angel and the Hindu war god Skanda or Murugan has been noted and brought to public attention for years by Sir Mark Amaropinkham, Grand Prior of the Scottish Knights Templar, who I believe has also spoken on your program.
Shows ago.
And he deserves credit for drawing our attention to the parallels between the Yazidi peacock angel and Murugan or Skanda of the Hindu pantheon, but also to Yazidi activists around the world, including, as I mentioned, Nalain Aljiwa Saliwa in Los Angeles, my colleague. And Nalain and I are publishing a website we've just started. It's called peacockangel.org. Please visit that website. We're in the process of taking authentic Yazidi oral tradition and applying to that principles of comparative religion. And this is something new. So I urge listeners to look at peacockangel.org, and also if you're on Facebook, the Yazidi Sanatan Dharma Society.
And this is not fundamentalism, this is pluralism, and I can get behind that.
Absolutely. Patrick Harrigan, thank you for joining us. We're going to let you go. Check out peacockangel.org and support the cause at Yazidi Dharma, Sanatan Dharma, right? Yazidi Sanatan Dharma.
Thank you for having me.
.com. Thanks, Patrick. Take it easy.
Okay.
All right,
Patrick Harrigan. Interesting research stuff. I love the singularity and the 6 points coming out. The way that that parallels into days in some cases, and what were an egg, and what were some of the other?
Well, the center. But I always thought base 10 in some ways can come from 10 fingers, but where did the 7 come from? And that's interesting from a dimensional look at things.
That's kind of what I was getting at with it. It seemed like maybe just trying to force the 7, make 6, and because 7 is more of a magic number to begin with, take that 6, make it a 7. I don't know.
I'd never thought about where it came from, and that was an interesting peek at it.
All right. Well, who's the next week's guest, my friend? Crispin McFall. Crispin McFall next week, ladies and gentlemen. Join us then, as always, at 2 o'clock Central Time for the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care.